Hello, good morning and welcome to NewsX. We're live on DSTV channel 421, Go TV channel 125, across all our social media handles. We're Joy News on TV. Now, within the next 60 minutes, I would be engaging the leader for Movement for Change, Alan Kyerematen, and we'll bring you that shortly. But first, some few stories that we need to bring your way before that exclusive interaction. As the Galamsey menace continues to ravage the country's river and water bodies, concerns have emerged about the quality of water we drink. In our latest Hotline documentary titled Drinking with Suspicion, Richard Kojoyako explores a puzzling question. Why do so many trust our sachet and bottled water with unknown source, yet remain skeptical of the water flowing from their own taps? Yeah, excerpts of that documentary.
Amid widespread distrust, one thing remains undeniable. Ghanaians are either drinking water from the Ghana Water Company or relying on sachet water. However, Stanley Mate, communications manager of the Ghana Water Company, insists that those choosing sachet water, despite having tap access, are doing so out of perception, not necessity. According to him, it's less about safety concerns and more about lifestyle shifts.
It's just about perception, and I think, and it's also about standards of living. When people's standard of living improve, okay, then they resort to all manner of expensive adventure or venture.
And today, mining is done right in the rivers. What it means is that we have added several chemicals to the water, which our treatment system does not take care of them. They do nothing to them.
There are districts where people are producing at their backyard and coming, and if they are small scale, they don't even come on the radar, but it poses a risk. Because if you are at a funeral in the village, whether you are Director General of GSA or not, you buy water and you would assume that this water has been tested and certified and approved for sale by the FDA. Of course, at the funeral, you're not going to take your phone and check whether it's on the website and so on and so forth. It's nice to do, but practically how many of us will do that? So to the extent that we do know that there are pockets of products circulating in commerce without the knowledge of state authorities, there's work to do. To the extent that the products even on the market could change in quality, requiring constant surveillance, we have work to do. And for us at the GSA, to the extent that people are using our logo without approval, there's work to do. But when you put all together, the GSA and the FDA has harmonized. We have harmonized, and I've said that, look, we are reducing the cost and the time. So maybe that harmonization should inure to the benefit of those who produce sachet and bottled water and should improve the quality existing. But I will always say that there is still more room for improvement.
People are fast losing faith in the very systems meant to keep them safe. Joseph Ofer is a business development manager at Norax Care, a company focused on water purification. As concerns deepen, so too does the demand for innovative ways to guarantee water safety at home.
I would say what we preach here at Norax Care is that if you need to be sure, you need to filter your own water at home. And so with Norax Care, we have filters like point-of-use water filters that you can use in your kitchen or in your shower. And if the water is not filtering, you can see for yourself. If it filters perfectly well, you can also see for yourself. And there are several other components in the water that can also help in the filtration of heavy metals as well. For instance, KDF 55 and activated carbon. And so it is very needful that when you need to be sure, you filter your own water at home.
Thanks for staying with us. We are your election headquarters. Now, in a last-minute push by the NDC to get the Electoral Commission to heed its demand for a forensic audit of the voters' register, which the party says contains discrepancies, the party is scheduled to hit the streets on Tuesday, which is in the next 24 hours, to protest what they describe as unfair treatment by the EC, speaking in various constituencies. To kick off phase 2 of a tour of the Greater Accra region, the main theme that ran through the NDC's flag bearer speech was the need for an audit of the register. Maxwell Agwagba has more in this report.
Hundreds of people welcoming the NDC flag bearer John Mahama to the Botiano English Manfrom constituency, specifically at the Manfrom School Park. He came with a message. Key amongst them is about the voters register and the NDC's call for an audit. John Mahama reiterated this call during a mini debate in the Wejagbari constituency, insisting that the party is raising red flags now because it seeks a peaceful election.
In 2016, when MPP raised a lot of issues about the register, what did the Electoral Commissioner do? She set up a 5-member committee headed by VCRAC Crab to audit the register, and she asked all the parties to bring their complaints to the committee. They sat for 2 or 3 weeks, I remember, and finished their work. And we all agreed that we were ready to go to the elections with the register. What is so difficult this time? That you cannot set up a committee and ask us to bring our complaints, and that you go through the register and make sure that you address all those complaints, so that all of us will say we are satisfied with the register. Why is it so different that this time that you cannot do that? It is not rocket science. It has been done before. What do you have to hide, Electoral Commission? If you have nothing to hide, let's audit the register. Let's all agree that the register is okay, and then let's go for the election.
During a press conference on Thursday, a deputy commissioner of the Electoral Commission remarked that the NDC should have called for an audit of the 2016 register, which he noted included photos of plants and animals representing voters. John Mahama had a response to this.
And plants and animals were on the register. I mean, that is an insult to the people of Ghana. You think you are insulting us, NDC? You are insulting all the people of Ghana. Because you are in charge of the register. And you, the person who was saying that, you were director of operations. And so if in 2016 there were animals and pets in the register, that's the reason why we must even scrutinize the register better. So that argument he made is rather giving us cause to want to make sure that we have a good register. And so you think you are insulting us, but you're insulting your own EC and showing us that you don't do your job properly.
The former NDC chairman Samuel Ofusuampofu emphasized that the party's sole objective is to ensure a peaceful and credible election.
When the NDC raised the issue, the Electoral Commission says that the 2016 register had plants and animals in the register. I was the director of election in 2016. The man who read the press statement by the Electoral Commission, Mr. Tete, was the director of elections. There was no any other time that any evidence of plants and animals were found in the register. So on Tuesday, we are demonstrating to the Electoral Commission to go there and to go and verify where the trees and plants are in the register.
Mahama also challenged the Kufuor-led government's claim of constructing 12,000 kilometers of roads, stating that there is no evidence to support the claim. He announced that a future NDC government would conduct an audit to verify these claims.
The traditional ruler who has spoken has complained about the poor road network. And I'm saying that the MPP say in 8 years of Kufuor, he did 3,000 and something kilometers of roads. In NDC, they say we did 4,700 kilometers of roads. And they alone have done 12,000 kilometers of roads. And the question I'm asking is, where are those roads? Because everywhere I go, the main complaint is about the road network. So, I don't know. Well, I've not been to Ebuakwa yet, and Chebi, where the president comes from. But I hear that there the roads are very good. So maybe that is where the 12,000 kilometers of roads are. But everywhere else in Ghana, the roads are terrible. And so when we come, the new roads they said they've done, we'll audit them to find out where the money that has been paid for 12,000 kilometers of roads, where has it gone?
We are indeed still your election headquarters. Well, today on Newsdesk, we speak with a man whose political journey has been anything but ordinary. A former minister of trades and industry, a seasoned politician who once held a prominent place in the New Patriotic Party. Now he leads Movement for Change as its flag bearer. He formed the Alliance for Revolutionary Change with former CPP flag bearer Abu Sakar. Together, they aim to challenge the entrenched political status quo. He has an ambitious goal of leading Ghana to the promised land as president, with the youth at the fore of his administration. He has what he calls a 10-point policy for youth engagement. And this morning, we are breaking that down into detail to get to understand what it means for the future of Ghana's youth. My guest this morning is Alan John Kyerematen, presidential aspirant and leader for Movement for Change. Thank you for your time here on NewsDesk.
Thank you very much. Good to see you.
Yes, it is. Congratulations on the filing of your nomination.
Thank you very much.
You made a lot of revelation during the filing, especially with who you decide to be your right-hand man, KOD. Why KOD, though?
Well, I've made a commitment to become a transitional president if I'm voted into power. A transitional president in the sense that I genuinely believe that it is our responsibility as political leaders to chart a path forward for the young people of this country. And why do I say so? If you look at the voter statistics for the 2020 general election, out of the 17 million registered voters, 10 million out of that were aged between 18 and 35. 10 million out of the 17 million. If you escalate it to 45, that's 18 to 45, you can imagine you'll be running into maybe 13 million out of the 17 million. So there's a compelling case for any serious, forward-looking politician to appreciate the fact that we need to get the youth at the center of our development agenda. The future belongs to them. And that is why I made a public commitment to make sure that I pick a demonstrably young person, and I'm choosing my words carefully, demonstrably young person, because somehow I think I can say I'm a young man.
Yes, you are, indeed.
But demonstrably young person. And that is why I picked on Kyerematen, a great guy. He's a professional, he's a corporate lawyer, he's a corporate executive. But you know, incidentally, he's also a broadcast journalist. And he's a political activist. So he comes to this ticket with different strategic interests. And for me, that is what we need in a young person who potentially could also lead the country.
But then we think about it. The vice president is supposed to head the economic management team. He doesn't have specialty in that area. And so some would have thought you would go for somebody more experienced like Abu Sakar. But why him? Well,
you know, there's no constitutional requirement for the establishment of an economic management team. It is nowhere in our constitution that any government should have an economic management team. And in that regard, a team that is chaired by the vice president. There have been various forms and structures of economic planning and management in different governments. I recall that there used to be an economic advisory council, I guess during President Mills's government, that had a different character. You know. So, yes, in the NPP, we had an EMT, an economic management team, chaired by the vice president. But I would have a different structure.
I'm interested in that structure. How would it operate?
Well, I will tell you that what you need is an independent body of people who have the expertise and the proven track record in economic management. They don't need necessarily to be politicians. I would, if and when voted into power, bring in somebody of renowned, I would say, and acknowledged experience globally, who has the capacity to be able to tell the government that you are wrong and that is the way to go. So you get independent advice. But if you have a vice president and a team of ministers that you control, who in some cases are even afraid to tell you as a president that the path that you are charting is the wrong path, then of what use is that team to you? So I would bring in a mix of individuals who have nothing to do with politics, but have the experience, and then mix it up with some strategic, I would say, political appointees. At any rate, I'm sure you know by now that I've indicated firmly that I'm in this game to establish a government of national unity when voted into power. So there's going to be a new political dispensation if and when Alan becomes president. Why should we have our most talented brains in Ghana outside the scope of government just because they are not politicians? For me, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. So it's along the same lines that I would pick a vice president for strategic reasons, not necessarily related to economic management and planning.
But how is your good friend taking the decision? Does he support it, Abu Sakara?
Oh, Abu Sakara has been a long-time friend many years ago. And, you know, there's a lot of negative propaganda in this country about vice presidential candidature. Look at what happened in the MPP, you know. Now, in our case, we have the Movement for Change, which is in an alliance with other political entities. And together we formed the Alliance for Revolutionary Change. So we understand ourselves, we know what we are doing, and as leader for the Alliance for Revolutionary Change, I made a commitment to the fact that we are going to appoint a demonstrably young person as vice president. So this is a decision that has been made, and Abu Sakara and other leaders of the Alliance for Revolutionary Change have major roles to play, not only in the campaign, but going forward, if and when we are voted into power. And you know, Abu Sakara is a very competent professional. So we're talking now about charting a path for young people to lead the country. So we are cool about it. The propaganda you've seen and cited in the newspapers that Abu Sakara has made a statement, that is completely untrue. It is not even in his nature, anybody who knows him, for him to make such a statement. Yes, we are together.
United.
United.
It brings me to your 10-point plan for youth engagement. I'm going through it as we speak. One of your standout proposals I'm seeing here is to establish a traders bank to support the informal trading sector, especially youth entrepreneurs. And I'm quite interested in this because I'm wondering, how will this differ from existing financial systems?
Number one, 70 to 80% of all young people, skilled, unskilled, are in trading or in commerce. I would have wished that many more of these young people would have transitioned, let's say, into manufacturing, into agriculture, into tourism, and other sectors of the economy. But that's what it is now. The majority of them are trading. And you can see, you go into the streets, you go into the markets, they are trading. Now, so anybody who is engaged in trading will tell you that the most important requirement for them to succeed is cash, is money. And unfortunately, our banks do not have the interest, the appetite to lend to young people, particularly those in commerce. They are not bankable as far as the banks are concerned. And that's why you find that many of the people who are trading particularly the young ones, have very little capital. But it doesn't make sense. If this is basically the majority of your population and your future, and they decide to remain in commerce, then you have to provide the opportunity for them to have access to capital. And that is why I have made a commitment to establish a traders bank. A traders bank meaning that this is government supporting the trading community to establish their own bank. This is not a state bank, but this is government providing them with a seed funding to establish their own bank, which will then benefit the young people, because the young people are excluded to a large extent from the formal banking sector.
But where will government get the seed funding from?
Interesting. Last time I came, I told Aisha that we have such excellent resource here in multimedia. I'm just waiting to rope all of you into my government, because your insight is fantastic. Yes.
Thank you.
Government has resources, partly from the revenue that they mobilize from taxes and other sources. And they also have the capacity to actually mobilize money from development financial institutions. And depending on the strategic orientation of every government, they can decide where to deploy those resources. That's income from revenue or from other sources. I believe that if we are looking at the strategic interests of the commercial and trading sector, then government must prioritize the deployment of such resources in supporting traders to have their own. But remember, if traders have to borrow at very high interest rates, then obviously the cost of capital for them will be high, meaning that they would also pass this on to consumers. And they are the channel for every individual in Ghana to be able to buy goods and services. So if they borrow at high interest rates, then obviously they will pass it on. And that also then becomes inflationary. It causes inflation. So it makes a lot of economic sense that if those in the trading sector and in commerce are able to borrow at reasonable rates, then they could also sell and market their goods at reasonable prices. So there's a connection between inflation and the cost of capital for those in the trading sector. But of course, please, don't get me wrong, this is not free money.
Okay, you pay back.
Yes, this is government providing seed funding on a work and pay basis. And can you imagine the anonymity or the strength of people in commerce, in trading, and that if we mobilize all of them and we provide that seed funding and help them to set up professionally, a trading bank, as I'm suggesting, it will probably become the biggest bank, not a state enterprise. All we need is to help them to start. And when they start, even with the susu, yes, they mobilize small monies and then they take off.
Interesting.
So there's going to be a major...
Let's look at your plan to deal with illegal mining. The impact of illegal mining is already beginning to bite hard. The Ghana Water Company served notice that in future, Ghana may be forced to import water because of the extent of pollution. I can see here in your plan that you plan to establish youth-owned mining companies with work and pay mining equipment and other resources. How will this impact on the fight against illegal mining?
Since you brought this up, let me open it, for discourse.
Okay.
I have a 10-point plan, robust, comprehensive plan to deal with Galamsey. And this point about helping the young people in Galamsey to set up their own companies, mining companies, is just one component of it. But the 10-point plan starts with a complete ban for 1 year on small-scale and community mining. Yes, you can have a state of emergency, but what are the elements of the outcome of that state of emergency? You have to go beyond establishing the state of emergency. So you start off with a complete ban. That's component one. Component two, you demobilize all the machinery and the equipment, including the earth-moving equipment, and make sure that they are moved into a storage and preservation environment. And I'm proposing that the engineers, Field Engineers Regiment of the Ghana Armed Forces will be responsible for that. Within that 1 year ban period, number one, government would ensure that we restore all our water bodies. And there's technology available to be able to do that easily. Within 1 year under an Allen presidency, all our water bodies will become clean again. But meanwhile, you have a ban of 1 year, which means that within that period, it is not even possible for us to have our water bodies being contaminated again. But again, within that 1 year period, we are also going to establish a new framework to support young people who would have been displaced by this 1 year period. There's going to be a period where all the degraded lands now would then be restored. And that in itself, it's a major commercial activity, which the people, the young people in Galamsey now would have the opportunity of being part of the restoration. And that in itself is a commercial enterprise. But within that 1 year period, the government would also support the young people to establish their own mining companies. And this is where the proposal comes in. They'll be provided with machinery and equipment which would be used in a sustainable way. Right now, if you look at the implements that they use, obviously it is not the kind of instruments that they should be using for mining. But because the government is providing seed funding for them, they can buy the equipment that is appropriate for sustainable mining. But it goes beyond that. Government will also give them the working capital to be able to undertake sustainable mining, and also give them the licensing rights, both from the mining licensing rights and also EPA licensing rights. So it's a whole comprehensive program. I mean, I know this was not meant to be a discussion on mining and Galamsey, but because you asked about it. So the point about integrating young people into the new framework for sustainable mining, that point that you find in my 10-point plan is only one component of how we deal with Galamsey.
I'm going through your proposals here, and if I must be honest, one of the key proposals that resonates with me as a young person is your plan to abolish multi-year advance rent payments. As a young person living in Accra, I've had to pay upfront payment for as much as 2 years. But then here's a difficulty. We already have law backing and ensuring that landlords do not charge more than 6-year rent. But then we do so nonetheless. And so there's a gap between the law and reality. How do you plan to bridge that gap?
Anytime there's a gap between the law and reality, the answer is very simple. Strict enforcement of the law. But if you look at my 10-point plan for housing for the youth.
Yeah.
It goes beyond just enforcement.
Okay.
If I'm a lawyer, if you review the current legislation and regulations for housing, you find that they are not robust enough. They are not robust enough. So I've made a specific recommendation, and it says, introduce new provisions under the existing legislation and regulations on rent and rent control to abolish the requirement of multi-year advance rent payments for young people. See, there's a difference there, especially first-time renters. So it's a question of looking at the content of the existing law. Some provisions within the existing law you would enforce, but it also requires introducing new provisions, specifically for young people who will be first-time renters.
Now, for people watching on social media and also on all our platforms across the country, we're discussing Ghana's Rent Act, and the specific area we're dealing with right now is Section 25, subsection 5 of the Rent Act 1963, Act 220. It stipulates that landlords should not demand more than 6 months' rent in advance. But unfortunately, that is not being enforced based on what you're saying.
Yeah.
So what would you do differently?
Well, so I said first is enforcement, and then also the review of the legislation then specifies and places emphasis and focus on first-time renters. The construction of the legislation and regulations does not necessarily identify first-time renters or young people as a category.
Okay.
It's generic, of generic application. It doesn't really mean that it's only young people who have a problem. But the emphasis must be on young people because they are more vulnerable in terms of their capacity to mobilize funding. And so first is to enforce some of the provisions in the existing law, and then also to make sure that you introduce new provisions. But the beauty of my 10-point plan is that people rent only because they have no possibility of owning. If you can own your house, why would you pay money to a landlord? Now, if you read the first recommendation under the 10-point plan,
okay,
I said, develop a new innovative affordable home ownership scheme for young people in employment through mortgage financing arrangements. I'm sure you are aware that in most of the matured economies, nobody puts fiscal cash down to buy property. All our relatives and our friends who live abroad who would tell you that they have houses. If you interrogate, these are houses under a 25 to 30-year mortgage. That's how it works. And so this particular recommendation is that we have a mortgage financing scheme that will allow a young person first to be able to own his own house, first year in employment, as long as you have a paycheck. So the key is making sure that they are employed. And that is what Alan Kyerematen's transformational agenda is all about. Putting people to work, particularly young people, putting young people to work. And I've made a commitment that I'll put 3 million young people to work within 1.5 years.
How?
I've created a youth digital platform.
Okay.
But let's escalate the point about housing. So, step 1, ensure that you create job opportunities for young people. Once they have an income and a paycheck, then you can bring them into this home ownership scheme. First year after school, you have a job, and then you can own your own house. under Alan Kyerematen's presidency. It may sound too good to be true, but that's exactly what it is. There's absolutely no reason why we should be having challenges with home ownership. If you look at the United States, the strength of the economy for many years was based on two home and housing schemes that they introduced. Fannie Mae and Fannie Mac, people know this. And in most of the matured economies, housing and mortgage financing is a major part of their governance architecture. It's a question of leadership.
But how affordable would it be for a young person like me when we know we live in a country where affordable housing is hardly affordable for young people to purchase?
Yes. In any economy, there will be different categories of real estate properties.
Okay.
Luxury homes, affordable homes, different types of housing, I would say, elements. Now, for mortgage financing, if government is going to support the establishment of a mortgage financing scheme, then part of the condition is to ensure that the mortgage financing arrangement is first targeted to affordable housing schemes. Because remember, government is going to provide tax incentives or fiscal and non-fiscal incentives for this mortgage financing company. So government has an interest in providing those incentives. Therefore, it is appropriate for government also to require any mortgage financing institution to work with government to provide affordable housing. And it is absolutely inappropriate for government to believe that it has a responsibility for building houses. Yes, if you have the resources, as other matured economies have, there's no problem with that. But if you don't have the resources, incentivize the public, the private sector in particular, to build affordable homes. Why is government always interested in building roads, in building hospitals, in providing public housing? The fact that it is called public housing or low income or affordable housing does not mean that it has to be constructed by government. Government provides, I want to be clear, government provides incentives to real estate developers to build affordable homes. Government provides incentives for a mortgage financing institution to provide financing support for young people and other categories of citizens to be able to buy homes constructed by the private sector, which are affordable homes. That's the way forward. You know, it's a question of leadership. Sometimes we make things so complicated. Why are we not just even replicating what happens in other countries? There are people in this country who have been in government who know that is the way to go. So it is the quality of leadership and our political will and our capacity for execution. There's too much talk in this country. People talk and there's no action. That's why I said NATO. Ghana is gradually becoming a NATO country, not because we belong to NATO. No action, talk only. That's NATO.
Let's talk about what you raised earlier, your plan to provide 3 million jobs for Ghanaian youth and the system you plan to put in place to achieve this. I'm quite interested. Expatiate on that.
Yeah, if you look at my GTP, particularly under the industrial transformation cluster, I've made a bold proposal to diversify this economy beyond cocoa. Can we understand how over 100 years Ghana has not been able to think beyond cocoa? I mean, it's strange. Why are we unable to diversify our economy? So I have made a proposal that will introduce 10 new strategic industries, just like we nurtured the cocoa industry. And I'm not just talking theory. I actually put it into practice when I was Minister for Trade and Industry. One of those 10 new strategic industries was the vehicle assembly and automotive industry. When I started talking about Ghana assembling cars, there were many people who said, oh, it's not possible. We can't even produce toothpicks. How can we assemble cars? But without even borrowing a cent, just through policy, appropriate policy, mind putting it down, we were able to attract within 1.5 years 5 out of the 6 global companies in the automobile industry. It doesn't happen anywhere in the world. At the same time, 1.5 years, Toyota, Volkswagen, Nissan, Kia, Hyundai, Peugeot. And the interesting thing is that, again, for many of these companies, it's the first time that they would introduce 4 or 5 different models at the same time in one market, particularly if it's a small market. So there must be something about what Alan did with the policy to have created an attractive environment for all these companies to be competing. And so what I'm saying is that these 10 new strategic industries, one of which I've just described, provides an opportunity for new skilled jobs. It's already started. But it's not just that. It's not just the assembly. We are going to manufacture spare parts and component parts in Ghana under an Kyerematen presidency. It's already actually being programmed. Because very soon, Ghana would be able to produce its own steel, we'll produce our own aluminium, we'll produce our own plastics from the added value to oil and gas. Once you have steel, iron, plastics, aluminium, you can manufacture any components. So that's only one industry. Pharmaceuticals is another strategic industry. Ghana imports 70% of all our medication requirements. It doesn't make sense. Why don't we support the private sector to create new infrastructure in terms of pharmaceutical companies that can reduce the importation of medication? So if you have pharmaceuticals, you have the petrochemical industry that's adding value to our oil and gas. You have vehicle assembly. You have a new sector to produce garments and textiles for exports. You have a new sector that is going to manufacture machines and equipment like Korea does, like China does, like all these major countries do. If you have 10 new strategic industries, all coming up within a matter of 3 years, at the same time, but driven by the private sector with support from government, can you imagine the number of jobs that will be created? And that is why I don't need to wait till I become president before I talk about what I will do when I'm president. So I've already introduced this digital platform, which is going to be launched very soon. 3 million jobs, and it's a digital platform. And it means that young people have to profile themselves now on this platform to indicate, do you want to be part of the petrochemical industry in the future? Is your preference for the pharmaceutical? Do you want to be part of the new garment and textile explosion that is going to occur? Or you want to stay in the agro-industrial sector? So you indicate your interest now.
And then you'll be roped into the system.
Fantastic.
Let's move on to the creative arts industry. I'm going through your plan right now. You plan to create a creative industry fund to support young artists, filmmakers, and musicians, as well as content creators. That's quite interesting. How do we plan to get the money?
If you go into the details of the Great Transformational Plan, I've talked about creating a sovereign wealth fund. Ghana is not a poor country. We have created the conditions for poverty in Ghana because of corruption, because of failed leadership, and our inability to diversify our economy, as I said. So under an Kyerematen presidency, there's going to be an economic boom, never ever seen in this country before. An economic boom which would then create new sources of income, which will now become the sovereign wealth fund. If you go to any matured country, they'll have a sovereign wealth fund. Now, once you have a sovereign wealth fund, which is the fund belonging to the people, not consolidated fund. This is a sovereign wealth fund, which government will use to trigger the growth of the economy in different ways. Part of that would be deployed to establish this creative industry fund. Because I understand the value of the creative industry. And that is why I am talking about supporting young artists, filmmakers, musicians, and content creators in the literary arts. And interestingly, if you go on and read about my proposal, it says, host an annual youth arts and culture expo to showcase talents of young people. Look, anybody who has experience in the creative industry would know that for you to monetize your creativity, you need to showcase it. Once you create, you need to showcase it. And there has to be a government-facilitated platform for people who are creating to showcase their talents. And that is why this annual expo is going to provide an opportunity for not just young people, but all people in the creative industry. And when you provide that forum, an annual expo, supported by government, that is where the networking begins to occur. And the creative industry is about networking. And so but it goes beyond that. I've also talked about protecting the intellectual property rights of people in the creative industry. If you want to sustain interest in the creative industry, it's all about intellectual property rights. There are people, whether they are in music or in the film industry, in the creative industry, who have not been able to benefit from their creativity and innovation because there's no regime for protecting their intellectual property. And that's a responsibility of government. But the icing on the cake, if you go on to read this, I'm saying support digital content creators, including influencers, bloggers, and vloggers, by facilitating access to training. Yes, you may have creative talent, but you can build on that talent through training and capacity building. And also global market exposure. I can put 1, 2 young people into the global film industry and you see what would happen.
So it's freebies for everyone, including those in the creative arts industry. As we wrap up the conversation, though, I'm looking forward to your performance in the December 7 poll. One of the biggest opposition parties, the NDC, they've raised doubts about the credibility of the voters' register. What's your thoughts about it? Do you have confidence in the EC?
The technical integrity and credibility of any election starts with the integrity of the voters' register. And whether it is internal elections in political parties or it is the general elections, that is where it starts from. In my view, the Electoral Commission is doing a good job. I mean, I have a lot of experience in this regard, so I understand what they are doing a good job. But I think it is important for the Electoral Commission, for the sake of ensuring the integrity of the elections, to respond to the specific cases that have been identified about irregularities in the voters' register. And it only goes to enhance the credibility of the commission.
So you agree that there should be an independent forensic audit?
Yes, it has to be. There's no, I'm not sure even why there should be a resistance to that. Because, yes, the Electoral Commission has indicated that they've responded to some of those comments. But we have to put all reasonable, to put doubt beyond any that there's the need to have a credible voters register. So if there's an indication that there are still doubts associated with the electoral register, then let us allow an extensive, comprehensive audit, which can be done without any difficulty. And I think it will help improve people's perception of the credibility of the Electoral Commission. Look, I know if you compare the record of our Electoral Commission, in spite of all the negative comments that are made over the years, our Electoral Commission over the years has been one of the most credible in Africa. So let us make sure that we are not degrading their reputation, because that is also not good for our general elections. But having said that, it is a responsibility of the Electoral Commission to prove that the electoral register is clean and has no basis for complaints. And it's only through an audit that they should. And I'm very sure that all the political parties, independent candidates, let's remember, this is not just about political parties. I am making a commitment to ensure that Ghana transitions into a new political era where, for the first time, we have a non-partisan president. And this is going to be a first in Africa, a non-partisan president. Of course, it won't be the first.
It won't be the first, but then you plan to do it.
Yes.
Unfortunately, we have to go. My guest in the studio today, Alan John Kyerematen. For more news, please log on to myjohnonline.com. Have a pleasant morning as you enjoy the rest of our programs.